The Valthene Empire had ruled half the known galaxy for 2 centuries, and they'd done it through one simple advantage: perfect information. Their sensor networks blanketed thousands of star systems, tracking every vessel, every energy signature, every piece of space debris larger than a basketball. Nothing moved in their territory without them knowing about it. Nothing surprised them anymore. Jake Morrison was about to change that. He sat alone in the monitoring station at Outpost 73, nursing his 3rd cup of terrible coffee and wondering why he'd ever thought a career in space would be exciting. Most nights were like this one, staring at screens full of data that never changed, watching ships follow their predictable routes, logging routine maintenance alerts. The Valthene officers who ran the station treated him like living furniture, which was an improvement over the ones who treated him like a servant. The alarm chirped so softly he almost missed it. Jake leaned forward, squinting at the display. A contact. Unidentified. His pulse quickened despite himself. Probably just another false positive from the aging sensors, but protocol required him to check. He ran the standard identification sequence and waited for the system to match the contact against the registry of known vessels. Nothing. He frowned and ran it again. Still nothing. No registry match, no energy signature, no transponder code. The system couldn't even tell him where the vessel had come from or what direction it was heading. Stranger still, the speed reading kept flickering between impossible numbers. 1 second it showed the vessel moving at twice the speed of light, which was absurd. The next second it showed subliminal speeds, but still far faster than any ship should manage without tearing itself apart. Jake pulled up the tactical display and felt his stomach drop. The contact had appeared deep inside Imperial space, nowhere near a jump point or known travel lane. It was just there, like it had materialized out of empty space. He tapped the intercom. "Hey, Supervisor Corval? Got something weird on sensors." The Valthene officer didn't even look up from his own station. Define weird, human. Jake gritted his teeth at the casual dismissal. Unidentified contact, no registry, impossible velocity readings, and no point of origin. Sensor malfunction. Reset your array and log the error. I already reset it. 3 times. The contact's still there. Corval sighed dramatically, like Jake had just asked him to solve an incredibly boring math problem. He walked over with the kind of slow, deliberate pace that said he was only doing this to shut Jake up. He glanced at the screen for maybe 5 seconds before shaking his head. Data corruption. The sensor package in Grid 7 has been glitching all week. I'll schedule maintenance. But sir, this doesn't look like. Log it and move on, Morrison. I don't have time for ghost chasing tonight. Corval walked away, already dismissing the problem from his mind. Jake stared at his screens, frustration building in his chest. This was exactly why the Empire kept having problems. Anyone who didn't fit their perfect model got ignored, and anything that didn't match their expectations got explained away. But Jake hadn't survived 6 years in Imperial service by being obedient. He'd survived by being thorough. He pulled up the historical sensor data from the last 4 hours and started mapping every appearance of the mystery contact. If it was just a glitch, the appearances would be random, scattered across the sensor grid with no pattern. If it was something else. His hands went cold. The contact had appeared 17 times in 4 hours. Not randomly. Every single appearance had been in a blind spot, gaps in the sensor coverage where multiple grids overlapped poorly or where the station's own bulk created shadows. And the timing was too precise to be coincidental. Whoever was piloting that vessel knew exactly where the Valthene sensors were weakest. They had a complete map of Imperial sensor coverage. Jake's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't some lost merchant ship stumbling through Imperial space. This was deliberate infiltration by someone with intelligence on their systems. Someone who'd been studying them long enough to find every weakness in their supposedly perfect detection grid. He reached for the intercom again, then hesitated. Corval had already dismissed him once. If Jake pushed this and turned out to be wrong, he'd be reassigned to some backwater station where humans sorted recycling for the rest of his career. But if he was right and didn't say anything, Jake made his decision. Sir, you really need to see this. It's not a glitch. The edge in his voice must have gotten through because Corval actually stood up this time. He crossed the command center with quicker steps, his auxiliary eyes narrowing as he focused on Jake's display. Jake showed him the pattern. 17 appearances, all in sensor blind spots, all timed to avoid maximum detection. He'd even calculated the predicted path based on the pattern. If he was right, the vessel would appear in Grid 12's overlap zone in approximately 3 minutes. Corval stared at the data for a long moment. Jake could practically see the gears turning in the Valthine's head, pride warring with the evidence in front of him. Finally, professional training won out. Enhance all scanners. Full spectrum analysis. Route everything through the backup processors. Corval's voice had lost its dismissive tone entirely. If something appears in grid 12, I want every piece of data we can possibly collect. The station's power systems hummed as additional energy flooded the sensor arrays. Jake watched the countdown timer he'd created, his heart hammering against his ribs. 2 minutes. 90 seconds. 1 minute. The contact appeared exactly where Jake had predicted it would. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what it did next. Jake watched, his mouth falling open, as the vessel executed a perfect 90-degree turn without slowing down. No deceleration curve. No wide banking arc. The ship was traveling at nearly 0.7 light speed, and it just turned like someone had grabbed it and yanked it in a new direction. The gravitational forces from that maneuver should have crushed any crew into paste. That's impossible, Corval whispered. Jake checked his instruments again, certain he'd misread something. But the data was clear. I'm reading it too, sir. Whatever that ship is, it just broke every law of physics we know. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The mystery vessel continued its impossible dance through space, appearing and disappearing, making turns that would kill anyone aboard a normal ship, moving at speeds that should have required cooling systems the size of small moons. Corval's hand shot to the emergency communication panel. This is Outpost 73 declaring code Obsidian. Unknown vessel in Imperial space, unknown origin, unknown capabilities, unknown intent. Requesting immediate command authority and reinforcements. The response came back almost instantly, and Jake could hear the tension in the dispatcher's voice. Code Obsidian confirmed. Admiral Keshara is being notified. Maintain all sensor locks. Do not attempt to engage or hail the vessel. Fleet assets are being scrambled to your location. Jake kept his eyes locked on his screens as the vessel continued its patrol around the outpost. It was almost like it was showing off, demonstrating just how easily it could dance around their best technology. Every few minutes it would appear, execute another impossible maneuver, and vanish again before their targeting systems could even lock on. Corval stood beside Jake's station, all pretense of superiority gone. How long have you been tracking this? 4 hours, sir. Since the start of my shift. And I dismissed you. It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from a Valthine officer to a human technician, it was close. Good work, Morrison. Your attention to detail may have just saved this entire sector. Jake nodded, unable to take his eyes off the dancing contact on his screen. The Valthine Empire had built 2 centuries of dominance on the absolute certainty that they controlled their own space, that they knew everything happening within their borders. In the last 20 minutes, that certainty had shattered into a million pieces. And Jake Morrison, a human technician who most of the station's crew barely acknowledged existed, was the only person who'd noticed. Admiral Keshara arrived at Outpost 73 exactly 4 hours after Jake's code Obsidian alert, and she brought enough firepower to start a small war. 12 Imperial warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapon systems already hot, their shields already charged. The Admiral herself came aboard the station like a storm given physical form, her crimson command uniform spotless, her 4 eyes scanning everything with the kind of intensity that made junior officers stand straighter. Jake had heard stories about Admiral Keshara. Everyone in the Imperial military had. She came from one of the oldest Valthine families, the kind who'd been serving the Empire since before humanity even had spaceflight. She ran her fleet with absolute precision and had exactly zero tolerance for failure, incompetence, or anything that threatened Imperial superiority. The idea of something operating in her space without her knowledge wasn't just a tactical problem for her. It was personal. "Show me everything," she said the moment she entered the command center. Not a greeting, not an introduction, just straight to business. Jake pulled up the compiled tracking data on the main display, trying to keep his hands from shaking. He'd briefed superior officers before, but never anyone this high-ranking, and definitely never in a situation this critical. He walked her through the pattern of appearances, the impossible maneuvers, the clear evidence that whoever was piloting that vessel had complete knowledge of Imperial sensor coverage. The Admiral studied the data in silence for almost 2 full minutes. Jake could feel sweat forming on the back of his neck. Finally, she turned to face Supervisor Corval. "Why wasn't this detected sooner?" Corval stiffened. "Admiral, the initial contact was classified as a sensor malfunction. The readings didn't match any known." "I didn't ask for excuses. I asked why it wasn't detected sooner. The temperature in the command center seemed to drop 10 degrees. Corvell opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "No excuse, Admiral." Keshara's gaze shifted to Jake. "You're the technician who identified the pattern. Morrison correct?" "Yes, Admiral. Your personnel file says you have a history of questioning standard procedures. 63 formal complaints filed in 6 years. Some of my officers would call that insubordination." Jake met her eyes, refusing to look away even though every instinct screamed at him to stare at the floor. "Some of my supervisors call it problem-solving, Admiral." For a moment he thought he'd gone too far. Then something that might have been approval flickered across the Admiral's face. "You'll remain in the command center. If this vessel appears again, I want your assessment immediately. Not after you check with your supervisor." "Immediately." "Understood." "Yes, Admiral." Keshara turned to the tactical display, studying the positions of her 12 warships. "Deploy sensor net formation Delta 7. If this vessel is as capable as the data suggests, we're not trying to capture it. We're trying to understand it." The fleet moved into position over the next 30 minutes, spreading out in a three-dimensional grid that covered thousands of cubic kilometers. It was a Valthene specialty, a sensor formation so comprehensive that it could track individual escape pods in the middle of a debris field. Nothing escaped Delta 7. Nothing. Jake monitored his instruments, watching the grid snap into place with military precision. Part of him wondered if the mystery vessel would even show up now that they were ready for it. Maybe it had been testing their response time. Maybe it had learned what it needed and moved on. Then every alarm in the command center started screaming at once. The vessel appeared in the exact geometric center of the formation, equidistant from all 12 warships. For 3 seconds it just hung there, completely motionless as if daring them to make a move. Then it accelerated. Jake watched in disbelief as the vessel moved directly toward the nearest warship, the destroyer Relentless Tide. The warship's sensors tracked it perfectly, feeding data to every screen in the command center. Distance closing. 5,000 kilometers. 4,000. 3,000. "Brace for impact," someone shouted. The vessel reached the destroyer's position and kept going. Not around it. Not over it. Through it. Or at least that's what the sensors said. One moment the contact was in front of the Relentless Tide, the next moment it was behind the ship, and the destroyer sensors showed no collision, no damage, no interaction at all. "What just happened?" Keshara demanded. Jake was already pulling up the sensor logs, his mind racing through possibilities. "Admiral, look at the gravitational readings. They're all wrong. The mass signature doesn't match the visual profile, and the spatial distortion patterns are." He stopped, his eyes widening. "Admiral, I don't think that ship passed through the destroyer. I think it went around it." "Explain." "Quickly. What if it's not using conventional propulsion? What if it's manipulating gravity itself, bending space? From our perspective it would look like it passed through solid matter, but really it just took a shortcut through folded space." One of the Valthene tactical officers laughed, the sound bitter and disbelieving. "That's pure theory. No one has achieved practical gravity manipulation. The energy requirements alone would explain why we can't read its power signature properly," Jake interrupted, his excitement overriding his usual caution around superior officers. "We're looking for fusion drives or antimatter reactors because that's what we use. But if they've cracked gravity manipulation, they're playing an entirely different game." The mystery vessel continued its demonstration, moving between warships like they were standing still. It executed turns that would have liquefied any living crew, reached speeds that should have required cooling systems the size of planets, and appeared on sensors in ways that made the laws of physics cry for mercy. "Admiral," Jake said quietly, "I don't think we can catch this thing. Maybe we should stop trying." Keshara turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "Are you suggesting we surrender our own space to an unknown contact?" "No, Admiral. I'm suggesting we try talking instead of chasing. We've been broadcasting standard hailing frequencies since the fleet arrived. No response. Maybe they don't care about standard frequencies. Maybe we need to send something different. Something that proves we're actually trying to communicate, not just yelling into the void." The Admiral crossed her arms. "What do you suggest, Technician Morrison?" Jake took a deep breath. This was either brilliant or career-ending, and he wouldn't know which until he tried. "There's an old Earth protocol from back when we first started exploring space. Before we had faster-than-light travel, before we met other species. We sent out probes with messages designed to be understood by anyone smart enough to find them. Simple mathematics. Universal concepts. The kind of thing that says, "We're intelligent and we want to talk." "Human nostalgia," Keshara said, but she didn't shut him down. "Show me." Jake pulled up a communications interface and started typing. The sequence was simple, elegant in its clarity. Prime numbers to prove intelligence. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Then basic arithmetic. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 3 plus 3 equals 6. The kind of math that would be true anywhere in the universe, regardless of what language you spoke or what species you belong to. "Send it on all frequencies," he said. "Not as a broadcast, but as a direct tight beam transmission to the vessel's last known position." Keshara studied the sequence for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it." Jake sent the message and immediately felt foolish. What were the chances that some impossibly advanced vessel would care about a math lesson from a human technician? What were the chances they'd even notice it among all the standard Imperial hailing frequencies? 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Jake was starting to sweat again, imagining the report that would end up in his file. Technician Morrison wasted valuable time during first contact scenario with primitive Earth mathematics. Then every alarm in the command center erupted simultaneously. The vessel appeared directly in front of Outpost 73, close enough that Jake could see it on the visual sensors. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Smooth curves that seemed to flow like water, a hull that reflected light in colors he didn't have names for, proportions that suggested it had been designed by someone who understood aesthetics as well as physics. And it was completely, utterly motionless. For the first time since Jake had detected it, the vessel was just sitting still like it was waiting for something. Then the response came through. The same prime number sequence Jake had sent, but extended far beyond what he'd transmitted. Primes continuing into numbers so large they made his head hurt. Then mathematics that went beyond basic arithmetic into equations Jake recognized from advanced physics courses. Relativity, quantum mechanics, dimensional theory. And at the very end, a message in text. Multiple languages scrolling across his screen. Belthine. Telcasian. Human Standard. Even ancient Earth languages that hadn't been spoken in centuries. The message was simple: "Greetings. We've been waiting for someone to look up." The command center fell into absolute silence. Admiral Keshara stared at the message, her 4 eyes wide with something Jake had never expected to see on a Valthine admiral's face: shock. "They responded," she said quietly. "They responded to a human greeting protocol." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as the implications hit him. The vessel had ignored hours of standard Imperial hailing frequencies. But the moment he sent a simple mathematical sequence, a human sequence from Earth's early space age, they responded immediately. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a choice. A very deliberate choice. "Admiral," Jake said slowly, "I think we just made first contact with something that's been watching us for a very long time. And I think they've been waiting specifically for humans to notice them." The coordinates came through an hour after first contact, transmitted on the same frequency Jake had used for his mathematical greeting. The message was direct and impossible to misinterpret. A set of spatial coordinates in neutral space, 3 days' journey from the outpost, along with a simple instruction. "Meet us here. Come in peace or don't come at all." Admiral Keshara wasted no time assembling a delegation. The Imperial flagship Sovereign Dawn departed within 12 hours, carrying the Admiral, her senior staff, a full security detail and, to Jake's complete shock, him. "You established contact," Keshara had said when Jake questioned the decision. "You'll see it through. Pack your things, technician. You're representing humanity at first contact whether you're ready or not." The 3-day journey gave Jake plenty of time to be terrified. He spent most of it in his assigned quarters, reviewing everything he knew about the mystery vessel and coming up with more questions than answers. Whoever these people were, they'd been operating undetected in Imperial space for who knew how long. They had technology that made the Empire's best warships look like toys. And they'd specifically chosen to respond to a human greeting after ignoring the Valthine entirely. What did they want? And why had they been waiting? Jake tried asking the Admiral, but Keshara was dealing with her own concerns. She spent most of the journey in private communication with the Imperial Council, and from what Jake overheard, those conversations weren't going well. The Council wanted aggressive posturing. They wanted shows of strength. They couldn't seem to accept that they'd encountered something they couldn't intimidate or control. On the morning of the 3rd day, they arrived at the coordinates. Jake's first thought was that his sensors had malfunctioned. The readings made no sense. Then he realized the sensors were working perfectly fine. Reality itself had just gotten weird. There weren't just 1 or 2 vessels waiting for them. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, spread across a volume of space the size of a small moon. And they were moving in patterns that made Jake's head hurt. Perfect synchronization, ships weaving between each other in formations that looked more like a dance than anything military. They moved in ways that violated every rule of physics Jake had ever learned. Instant accelerations, impossible turns, formations that shifted and flowed like schools of fish in an ocean. Defensive positions, Admiral Keshara ordered, her voice tight. Admiral, I don't think that's, Jake started. I know what you think, technician. But I'm responsible for this ship and everyone on it. We go in ready. The Sovereign Dawn's shields powered up, weapon systems moving to standby. Jake held his breath, half expecting the entire fleet of mystery vessels to vanish or worse, attack. Instead, they simply adjusted their formation, creating a clear corridor leading to the center of their formation. An invitation. The communication came through on every channel simultaneously, audio, visual, even text scrolling across navigation displays. The face that appeared on the main screen made Jake's heart skip a beat. She was human. Late 50s maybe, with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that crinkled at the corners like she smiled often. She wore a uniform Jake didn't recognize, and behind her he could see other humans working at stations that looked nothing like Imperial technology. Admiral Keshara, the woman said, her voice warm but professional. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I'm Director Helen Foster of the Drift. It's an honor to finally meet you face to face. Jake saw the Admiral's confusion and felt his own mind racing to catch up. The Drift? He'd never heard of any human colony called the Drift. According to every history file he'd ever read, all the human colonies were accounted for, all part of the galactic community that the Valthene Empire had absorbed decades ago. The Drift, Keshara repeated slowly. I'm not familiar with that designation. Helen's smile turned slightly sad. No, you wouldn't be. We left Earth 300 years ago, long before your empire made contact with humanity's home world. We were part of the third wave of colony ships, back when humans were still figuring out if we could survive in deep space. Our ship was called the Drift and we just kept the name. Jake leaned forward, unable to stop himself. 300 years? But that would mean you left before the collapse, before the Treaty of Pacific Alliance, before humanity even had reliable faster-than-light travel. Helen's attention shifted to him and her smile widened. You must be Jake Morrison. Yes, exactly right. We left with primitive technology by modern standards. A generation ship designed for a one-way trip to the edge of known space. The plan was to find a suitable planet, settle it, and eventually reconnect with Earth once we'd established ourselves. But you didn't, Admiral Keshara said. No. We found something better than a planet. We found purpose. Helen gestured, and the view on the screen shifted to show the fleet of impossible vessels moving in their intricate patterns. While Earth was making contact with other species, learning galactic politics, joining the larger community, we went a different direction. We decided to focus entirely on one thing, understanding the universe. 300 years of pure research, Jake breathed. 300 years of asking questions and refusing to accept that anything was impossible, Helen corrected. While the Valthene Empire was perfecting conquest and Earth was learning diplomacy, we were perfecting science. Gravity manipulation, quantum shielding, dimensional sensors, spatial compression. Technologies that the rest of the galaxy considers theoretical, we consider basic tools. One of the Valthene officers on the bridge, Commander Valdar, Jake remembered, spoke up. If you've had these capabilities for so long, why reveal yourselves now? Helen's expression grew serious. Because we've been watching the Empire expand for 70 years and frankly we're concerned. Your pattern of conquest has become increasingly aggressive. 17 systems absorbed in the last decade alone, most of them peaceful civilizations that posed no threat to Imperial security. Those systems are now protected under Imperial law, Keshara said, her voice cold. Protected? Or controlled? Helen shook her head. We've monitored the occupied systems, Admiral. We've seen how non-Valthene species are treated. Second-class citizens at best, labor forces at worst. You're expanding towards sectors where we have friends. Peaceful civilizations that don't deserve to be absorbed into an empire that sees them as inferior. Jake's stomach dropped as he started to understand. You've been protecting them. That's why some Imperial expansions have failed mysteriously. Helen nodded, focusing on him again. The Kepler offensive 5 years ago. Do you remember it, Admiral? Your fleet encountered cascading system failures and had to retreat. That was us. The Andrus incursion 3 years ago, same thing. We've been your invisible opposition for years, stopping your advances into sectors we've sworn to protect. The temperature in the command center seemed to drop. Admiral Keshara's hand moved toward her sidearm, and Jake saw security officers tensing. This was going wrong fast. "This is extortion," the Admiral said quietly. "No," Jake said louder than he intended. Everyone turned to look at him. "No, it's a warning. They could have destroyed us. Right now, with the technology they're showing us, they could probably take apart this entire ship without us being able to fire a single shot. But they're not doing that. They're talking. That means they want something other than war." Helen's smile returned, and Jake felt like he'd just passed some kind of test. "Jake understands. We've been monitoring you specifically, Specialist Morrison. Your service record makes for interesting reading. 63 formal complaints about discriminatory policies. 41 reports advocating for better treatment of non-Valthene personnel. You've been trying to change the Empire from within." Jake felt his face flush. "You've been spying on me? We've been watching everyone who might help the Empire become something better than it currently is. You're not alone, Jake. There are thousands of people throughout Imperial space who see the same problems you do. Good people from every species under Imperial authority, who serve loyally while quietly hoping for reform." Admiral Keshara stepped forward. "What exactly do you want from us, Director Foster?" "A choice," Helen said simply. "Continue your current path of aggressive expansion and systematic discrimination, and we'll oppose you at every turn. We won't invade, that's not who we are, but we'll make further conquest impossible. Every time you try to absorb a peaceful civilization, we'll be there to stop you. Or you reform. Establish genuine equality for all species under Imperial authority. Stop treating non-Valthene citizens as inferior. End the aggressive expansion. Join the community of civilizations as partners instead of conquerors." Helen paused. "We know that sounds like a lot. We know it won't happen overnight. But we need to see the Empire start moving in that direction." "And if we refuse?" Keshara asked. Helen's expression grew sad. "Then people like Jake Morrison will keep fighting for change from within, and we'll help them however we can. It'll take longer, be messier, possibly cost lives. But change will come eventually, Admiral. The only question is whether it comes from enlightened leadership or exhausted resistance." The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Admiral Keshara stood perfectly still, staring at the space where Helen's image had been. Outside the viewport, the Drift's fleet continued its impossible dance, a casual demonstration of power that made every weapon on the Sovereign Dawn look like antiques. Jake watched the Admiral's face and saw something he'd never expected to see there. Not anger. Not pride. Just honest, genuine uncertainty. "Technician Morrison," Keshara said quietly. "In your professional opinion, can we defeat them?" Jake looked at the dancing ships, thought about technology 300 years more advanced than anything the Empire had, and gave the only honest answer he could. "No, Admiral. I don't think we can. But I don't think we have to." Retry. The journey back to Imperial space was the longest 3 days of Jake's life. Admiral Keshara spent most of it locked in her private quarters, reviewing every scrap of data they'd collected on the Drift. The rest of the crew walked around like they were attending a funeral, speaking in hushed voices when they spoke at all. Everyone knew what was coming. The Admiral would have to report to the Imperial Council, and the Council would have to make a decision that could reshape the entire Empire. On the second day, Jake got summoned to the Admiral's quarters. He'd never been in an Admiral's private space before, and he was surprised by how sparse it was. No decorations, no personal items, just military efficiency and a desk covered in data pads. Keshara sat behind that desk, looking more tired than Jake had ever seen her. "Sit down, Morrison." Jake sat, his heart pounding. "I've been reading your personnel file. Not the summary version, the complete file. Every complaint you filed, every incident report, every formal protest about Imperial policies." She looked up at him. "You should have been discharged years ago. Do you know why you weren't?" "No, Admiral." "Commander Brooks. Your first commanding officer when you joined Imperial service. He was Valthene, from an old military family, significant influence in the officer corps. Every single time a discharge order came through with your name on it, he personally cancelled it. I found his private logs in the classified archives." Jake felt his throat tighten. Commander Brooks had died 3 years ago in a training accident. They'd never been close, but the old Valthene had always been fair to him, which was more than Jake could say for most officers. "He kept detailed observations about you," Keshara continued. About how your complaints, while technically insubordinate, were always right. How the Empire's discriminatory policies were making us weaker, not stronger. How people like you represented the future, if we were smart enough to listen. She paused. He wrote that the Empire's greatest weakness wasn't our enemies. It was our inability to recognize talent when it didn't come in the form we expected. Jake didn't know what to say to that. I need to tell you something, Morrison. Something I've never told anyone in my professional life. Keshara stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars. My grandfather was Telcasian. A conquered species, absorbed into the Empire 80 years ago. He was a brilliant engineer who earned his place in the Imperial military through exceptional service. He married a Valthene woman, and their children, my parents, spent their entire lives trying to prove they were loyal, trustworthy, truly Valthene despite their mixed heritage. Jake stayed silent, sensing this was something the Admiral needed to say. I grew up watching my parents overcompensate. They were stricter than pure Valthene families, more traditional, more rigid. They pushed me into the military and told me I had to be perfect, had to be better than everyone else, had to never give anyone a reason to doubt my loyalty. Keshara's voice was flat, emotionless. So that's what I did. I became the hardest officer in the fleet. The most by the book. The least tolerant of deviation or weakness. I thought if I was harsh enough, traditional enough, no one would ever question whether I belonged. She turned to look at Jake. Then I watched the drift demonstrate what humans accomplished when they focused on growth instead of proving themselves. 300 years of pure advancement because they didn't waste energy on internal politics or discrimination. And I realized I've spent my entire career doing exactly what the Empire does, wasting potential by caring more about hierarchy than capability. Admiral, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because in 12 hours I'm going to stand in front of the Imperial Council and recommend we accept the drift's terms. I'm going to tell them that continuing our current path leads to failure, and that change is our only option for survival. And when I do that, I'm going to make enemies. Powerful enemies who benefit from the current system. Jake understood what she was saying. You want me to back you up. I want you to tell the Council the truth. You're the human who made first contact. You're the one the drift specifically reached out to. Your voice will carry weight that mine won't, especially on this issue. She sat back down. But I need to be honest with you, Morrison. If we do this, both our careers will never be the same. We'll have targets on our backs for the rest of our lives. Jake thought about the thousands of people Helen had mentioned, people throughout the Empire who wanted change but felt powerless. He thought about Commander Brooks, quietly protecting Jake's career for years because he believed change was possible. He thought about every time he'd bitten his tongue when he saw injustice. Every time he'd filed a complaint knowing it would probably be ignored. Admiral, I've been trying to change the Empire from the inside for 6 years. I'd rather try and fail with support than keep trying alone. Keshara nodded slowly. Then we do this together. 2 days later, Jake stood in the Imperial Council chambers for the first time in his life, trying not to be overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the place. The chamber was designed to intimidate, with a massive domed ceiling and council seats arranged in ascending tiers so the councilors literally looked down on anyone addressing them. 300 of the Empire's most powerful officials sat in those seats, and every single one of them was staring at Jake like he was something they'd found stuck to their shoe. Admiral Keshara had already presented her report, a detailed analysis of the drift's capabilities, a comprehensive review of their demands, and her professional recommendation that the Empire accept those terms immediately. The chamber had erupted in outrage. Half the council was calling for her removal from command. The other half was demanding military action against the drift, as if superior firepower would somehow overcome a 300-year technology gap. Now it was Jake's turn. Honored counselors, he began, his voice shaking slightly. I'm technical specialist Jake Morrison, and I was the one who established first contact with the drift. I'd like to add something to the Admiral's report. A human technician has nothing to add to strategic discussions. Someone called from the upper tiers. Jake felt anger flash through him, burning away his nervousness. With respect, counselor, a human technician is exactly who the drift chose to speak to first. That should tell you something. The chamber quieted slightly. The drift told me they've been monitoring people throughout the Empire who want reform. They said there are thousands of us, Valthene, Telcasian, human, every species under Imperial authority. People who serve loyally but see that we could be better than we are. Better? An older Valthene counselor stood. We are the most powerful empire in known space. What could be better than power? Respect, Jake said simply. The drift has power we can't match, but they didn't attack us. They talked. They offered partnership. That strength we don't have, the strength to be powerful without needing to dominate everyone around us. You speak of partnership with those who threaten us, another counselor said. They're not threatening us, they're warning us. There's a difference. Jake looked around the chamber. I've read the reports on failed expansion campaigns. Kepler. Endrus. Meridian. We blamed logistics, bad luck, equipment failures. But it was the drift stopping us from conquering peaceful civilizations. They've been our invisible opposition for years, and we never knew because they're that much better than us. So we should surrender? The question came from Counselor Velmar, known for his traditional views. No. We should learn. The drift isn't asking us to surrender, they're asking us to grow. To become the empire we always claimed to be, strong, just unified, instead of the empire we actually are. And you presume to lecture this council on what the empire should be? Velmar's voice dripped with contempt. Jake met his eyes. I presume to tell you what I've seen, counselor. I've spent 6 years watching talented people get ignored because they're the wrong species. I've watched good ideas get dismissed because they came from humans or Telcasians instead of Valthene. I've watched us waste potential because we care more about hierarchy than capability. The chamber erupted in argument. Some counselors were shouting for Jake to be removed. Others were shouting back. The noise was deafening. Then someone laughed. The sound cut through the chaos, unexpected and sharp. Jake turned to see Commander Torval, a senior military representative, actually laughing. The human has a point, Torval said, his voice carrying through the chamber. We've been calling our discrimination tradition, for so long that we forgot to ask if the tradition was worth keeping. My own son is a brilliant tactical officer, but he's had to work twice as hard as his peers because his mother is Kelrosian. I've watched him earn promotions that should have come years earlier. That's not strength. That's waste. Other voices joined in. A Telcasian counselor spoke about qualified candidates passed over for promotion. A Valthene military official admitted her best engineer was human but had been denied advancement 3 times. The conversation was shifting, slowly but unmistakably, from automatic rejection to genuine consideration. Admiral Keshara caught Jake's eye from across the chamber and gave him a tiny nod. They had a chance. Maybe not a great chance, but a real one. The debate continued for 3 more hours before the council called for a vote. Accept the drift's terms and begin genuine reform, or reject them and face whatever came next. Jake watched the vote tally appear on the chamber's main display, his heart in his throat. 127 in favor. 109 against. They'd won. By 18 votes they'd won. The empire was going to change. The vote changed everything, but not in the way Jake expected. He'd thought that once the council agreed to reform, things would just happen. New policies would be written, discrimination would end, and the empire would transform into something better. Instead, what followed was chaos. The announcement went out across every imperial channel within hours. The empire would begin implementing reforms to establish genuine equality among all species. Aggressive expansion would cease. New councils would be formed to address grievances from non-Valthene citizens. It sounded good on paper. In reality, half the empire celebrated while the other half threatened rebellion. Jake watched the news reports from his temporary quarters at Imperial Command, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. Protests erupted on a dozen worlds. Some military units refused to accept the new directives. 3 planetary governors resigned in protest. The Imperial News Network ran opinion pieces calling the reforms everything from the dawn of a new era to the death of Valthene culture. On the 4th day after the vote, Jake got summoned to a meeting he definitely wasn't qualified for. Admiral Keshara, 5 senior counselors, and representatives from the Drift, all gathered in a secure conference room to discuss implementation strategy. Jake stood in the corner trying to be invisible, wondering why he was even there. Then Director Helen Foster appeared on the main screen, and she smiled directly at him. Jake, good to see you again. I have a question for you. Everyone in the room turned to stare. Jake felt his face heat up. Yes, Director? How would you like to be the first Imperial citizen to visit the Drift's main research facility? We'd like to start cultural and technological exchange programs, and I think you'd be perfect for the first group. Jake's brain short-circuited. Me? I'm just a technician. Shouldn't you be taking scientists or diplomats or... We want people who understand both sides, Helen interrupted gently. You've lived in the Empire. You've seen its flaws and its strengths. You've proven you can bridge different perspectives. That's more valuable than any number of advanced degrees. Admiral Keshara spoke up. Director Foster, Technician Morrison is valuable to our reform efforts here. We need people who understand. Which is exactly why we want to train him, Helen said. The Empire needs people who can explain drift technology to Imperial citizens and Imperial culture to the drift. Jake can be that bridge if he's willing. Jake looked at the Admiral, who studied him for a long moment before nodding. Your choice, Morrison. I won't order you either way. It wasn't really a choice not for Jake. The chance to learn technology 300 years more advanced than anything the Empire had? The opportunity to actually make a difference instead of just filing complaints that got ignored? He'd be an idiot to say no. When do I leave? Helen's smile widened. How about now? 3 hours later, Jake found himself on a drift transport ship, heading toward coordinates that weren't on any Imperial star chart. The ship itself was nothing like Imperial vessels. No sharp angles or military efficiency. Instead, everything curved and flowed, and the propulsion system was so smooth Jake couldn't even tell they were moving until he looked out a viewport and saw stars streaking past at impossible speeds. Welcome aboard the Wanderer, a young human woman said, extending her hand. I'm Dr. Lisa Chen, Xenotechnology Specialist. I'll be your guide during orientation. Jake shook her hand, still trying to process everything. I'm not sure I'm qualified for this. I barely passed university physics. Lisa laughed. Neither did I the first time. The drift has different teaching methods. We don't expect you to understand everything immediately. We expect you to ask questions and not give up when the answers are complicated. The research facility, when they arrived, made Jake's jaw drop. It wasn't a station or a planet. It was both and neither. A massive structure that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially somewhere else. Ships moved in and out of it through openings that appeared and disappeared. The whole thing pulsed with a soft blue light that Jake's instruments couldn't quite classify. How is this even possible? He breathed. Dimensional anchoring, Lisa explained. The facility exists in multiple spatial dimensions simultaneously. Gives us a lot more room than conventional stations, and makes us basically impossible to attack since you'd have to hit us in all dimensions at once. Over the next week, Jake got the most intense education of his life. The drift didn't just teach him about gravity manipulation or quantum shielding. They taught him to think differently about problems. Where Imperial science asked, what are the rules? Drift science asked, why do these rules exist and can we change them? Jake met researchers from all over human space. Descendants of that original colony ship who'd spent 300 years pursuing knowledge for its own sake. They showed him engines that bent space instead of pushing through it, shields that redirected energy into other dimensions, sensors that could detect events before they happened by reading probability waves. But the most important lesson came from Director Helen herself, during a private conversation in her office overlooking the main research bay. You're wondering why we revealed ourselves now after staying hidden for so long, she said. It wasn't a question. Jake nodded. You could have stayed invisible forever. Why take the risk? Because hiding forever isn't living, Jake. We spent 300 years advancing our science and that was good and necessary. But we realized we were becoming isolated, disconnected from the rest of humanity. We had all this knowledge and no one to share it with. She gestured at the research facility. What good is understanding the universe if you're the only one who benefits? But why contact the Empire specifically? Why not go to Earth or the independent systems or... Because the Empire needed us most, Helen said simply. Earth is doing fine. The independent systems are stable. But the Valthene Empire was on a path toward collapse. Maybe not this year or next year, but eventually. You can't build a sustainable civilization on conquest and oppression. It always falls apart. Jake thought about the protests, the resistance to reform, the counselors who'd voted against change. What if it doesn't work? What if the Empire can't change? Then it will fail and something better will replace it. But I don't think it'll come to that. Helen smiled. You know why? Because of people like you. People who spent years fighting for change even when it seemed hopeless. You weren't alone, Jake. There were thousands of others doing the same thing, filing complaints, protecting junior officers, quietly pushing back against injustice. You built the foundation for reform. The drift just gave you the leverage to actually implement it. 2 weeks into his stay, Jake got a message from Admiral Keshara. The first reform initiatives were being implemented. Integrated promotion boards, anti-discrimination training, civilian oversight councils. It was messy and meeting resistance, but it was happening. She asked when he'd be returning to help. Jake stared at the message for a long time before responding. Part of him wanted to go back immediately, to be part of the changes happening in real time. But another part recognized that he could do more good here, learning technology that the Empire desperately needed, becoming the bridge between two civilizations. He wrote back, "I'll return when I can teach others what I'm learning. The Empire doesn't just need reform. It needs new possibilities." Keshar's response came an hour later, "Understood. Learn well, Morrison. We're counting on you." 3 months after arriving at the Drift facility, Jake gave his first presentation to Imperial scientists via remote link. He demonstrated basic gravity manipulation principles, showing them how to think about space as something flexible rather than fixed. Half the audience was skeptical. The other half was fascinated. By the end, even the skeptics were asking questions. After the presentation, Lisa found Jake in the cafeteria, grinning. "You did great. Very natural teaching style. I felt like I was fumbling through most of it. That's what good teaching looks like. You met them where they were instead of talking down to them." She sat down across from him. "Helen wants to expand the exchange program. Bring more Imperial citizens here, send some of our people to Imperial space. You interested in coordinating it?" Jake thought about his old job at Outpost 73, monitoring sensors and filing complaints that no one read. He thought about the Empire slowly, painfully transforming into something better. He thought about Commander Brooks, protecting his career for years because he believed Jake represented the future. "Yeah," he said. "I'm interested." 6 months after the Drift revealed themselves, the first joint Imperial Drift research station opened in neutral space. A year after that, gravity-based medical technology was healing injuries throughout Imperial space that had previously been permanent. 2 years later, integrated crews served on ships using hybrid Imperial Drift technology. The changes were slow. There were setbacks and resistance. Some traditionalists never accepted the reforms. But gradually, unmistakably, the Empire was becoming something different. Something better. Jake Morrison, the human technician who'd noticed what everyone else missed, became one of the most important people in Imperial space. Not because he was brilliant or powerful, but because he'd never stopped believing that things could be better, even when everyone told him to shut up and accept reality. He stood on the observation deck of the Joint Research Station, watching Imperial and Drift ships working together, and thought about how it had all started. One anomaly on a sensor screen. One decision to look closer instead of dismiss it. One human greeting sent into space, hoping someone would answer. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest moments. You just had to be brave enough to notice them and stubborn enough to follow through. Jake smiled and headed back to work. There was still so much to learn, so much to teach, so many bridges left to build. The galaxy was changing. And he got to be part of making it happen. Retry.